In addition to providing selectors that work across generic elements of a document, jQuery also has a set of selectors and filters that are just used for dealing with form elements. And they work pretty much like any other selector, but they happen to start with a colon character like filters do. These kinds of selectors and filters make it really easy to build form processing logic using jQuery. So you can see the table here. This table lists the available selectors for form elements. So they pretty much match up directly with the names of the various form elements that you'll find in a document. So, for example, you have selectors for input and text and password and radio and checkbox submit all the way down. You can use these to select those individual kinds of elements on the form. So in addition to selectors, there's form filters, and these are the form filters that are available. So there's only a few of these, and they're essentially convenience filters to help you select form elements that are in a certain state. So for example, we have a filter for enabled and disabled, and we've got a filter for checked and selected. So for example, the checked one matches form elements that are checked, and obviously that applies only to radio buttons and checkboxes, whereas the enabled and disabled will match form elements that match that state. So let's go ahead and fire up our code editor and take a look at a couple of form examples. So I'm going to jump over to the code here. I'm going to go ahead and open up the form selectors start file, and you can follow along with me, or you can just go ahead and look at the finished example to see how all this works. So I'm going to open this up in my editor, and here we are. This file is a bit different than the previous examples, so let me switch to design view so you can see. Here we have a form, and you can see we've got various kinds of form controls here in the file. So we've got text areas, got radio buttons, and we've got some checkboxes. Here's a text area, file upload control, and reset buttons. So let's go back to the source code and start writing some jQuery functions that exercise this. So let's begin. I'm going to write my query, and I'm going to apply CSS to make the results visible. The first thing I'm going to do is select all of the inputs that are inside of a form. So I'm going to write the form tag and then colon input. So let's save. Let's view this in the browser. Okay, so you can see that that selected all of the input elements and put bold red around them. These are all inputs. So let's go back to the code. Okay, so let's further refine this. I'm going to just copy and paste, comment that guy out. All right, so now let's look for just text elements. So we'll save, and now we're just going to find text elements inside the form. And we're going to refresh this. And you can see now that only the text elements got selected. Let's try adding some additional filters on here. Let's go back to the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one more element in here. I'm going to insert a row above, and I'm going to put just a disabled text field in here. And right there, I'm going to go to my toolbox. And you can do this using your text editor. I'm just going to put a text field in, and I'm going to go back to the source view, and I'm going to make this guy disabled. Okay, so now when we go back to the design, you can see that I've got three fields now. These two are enabled, this one is not. So let's go back to the source, and let's change our code now to only look for elements that are enabled. So I'm going to comment this guy, copy, and paste. Only now I'm going to say, inside a form, look for text elements that are enabled. Okay, so there's the form selector, and there's the filter. All right, so let's go back, and now I'm going to refresh. And you can see that the enabled fields got selected and had the CSS applied, but the disabled one did not. And if we were to change that selector to be disabled, then only that one would be selected. Okay, let's go back to the code. What we're going to do now is comment that out, copy and paste. Now we're going to look for checked items. So you can see in the design view, let's see, we're going to take this guy and this guy and this guy. We're going to make those guys checked to make sure that this works correctly. So let's see, where's my radio button? This guy is going to start out as checked, and we'll put that on the checkboxes as well. We'll put it there, and we'll put it there. So now when we go back to the design view, now we have some default check marks on these guys. So let's go back and write the code to fix that. We're going to look now for items that are checked. Okay, so we'll save, and we'll go back to the browser. And now we're going to refresh. And you can see that the radio button and the checkboxes that were checked got selected by the jQuery selector and then filtered out properly. And let's make one further refinement to that. Let's go back to the code. So that got everything that was checked. Let's suppose we only wanted checkboxes, though. So I know I'm going to ask for elements in the form that are checkboxes and they happen to be checked. So you can imagine how useful this would be in trying to process a form. So I'm going to save, go back to the browser, and refresh. And you can see that only checkboxes that are checked are now being selected. Okay, so that's form selectors and filters. And I think it's pretty obvious by now how powerful jQuery will be in helping you with your document coding and form processing. So let's move on to our next subject.